That's really
thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And the main one.
Great interview.
Good, excellent. Now we're going to have a kind of luxury because we can have a discussion between us, even be very critical because we don't have the speaker here. So we don't have to be too restrained. So a different format from what we had this morning. So not just questions and answers, but some reflections, please, some comments on these issues that we really are trying to address. I mean, the primary interest, obviously, of Lord Puttnam there was very the policy aspect. And if you remember at the very beginning, he said it's very much a matter of perception. And I think it was Stephen this morning started his first slide. Where is he? That it is a matter of perception again. So that is one thing. The other, of course, I think he said that was very important, and I wonder if we have any chance of achieving it, of having a united voice, which will be great, and set out clear policy options and that it should be scalable. But I think the final thing was a vision, moral courage, vision of a sustainable future. So just a few points that I wanted to summarize there. Okay, so I'll open it and welcome your reflections, comments, criticisms. Yes, sir. Yes. And Godfrey, say who you are, please.
Godfrey Boyle from the Open University. I've got various things to say, but the first, just following from David Puttnam's excellent talk, Stephen and I went to see a film that we thought was going to be disappointing last night, but in fact, which was really quite moving, namely The Age of Stupid, which some of you may have seen already. And it does very much follow on from what David Puttnam was saying. The sheer urgency and need for action is brought out very movingly in that film. I have lots of other things to say, but that'll do for now.
Okay, right. Yes, Eileen.
I just want to put a question in, really, for other people much better equipped than me to say something about it. One of our speakers this morning ruled out that we were in any kind of serious tipping point. And I have read papers recently which suggest that there is scientific evidence that we are moving towards, in fact may have even gone over the threshold of where our current way of living on the planet is no longer sustainable. And so for a long time now, I've wondered whether we might be better off putting our efforts into emergency systems of adaptation across the globe. I mean, we've actually got the resources all over the place and armies and all the rest of it. And so I just like to put that into the conversation, because that seems to me to be very significant in where we think collectively about where is best to put our efforts. Although that might be just pie in the sky, really, think we could think so rationally. But it does seem to be a big difference between pouring our efforts into trying to get political change on changing systems, which actually it may all be too late, that we might actually be into a position where how do we handle hundreds of millions of people moving around the globe even faster than they are now to get away from completely inhabitable regions? And what are we going to do about that? I mean, that kind of thing.
Right. Eileen, I think, has opened up some quite big challenges. And I was wondering if there's anyone who would like to or make a different comment. Okay.
Hi, that's a different comment. Diana Mangalaj, Range Management School in France. So Lord Puttnam was putting something like the only weapon of scientists is embarrassment. I would challenge that, because that's more of the same attitude we have as scientists, and it basically never works. So I would say this way of saying, oh, let's get better better science input towards policy, and it's always in this kind of broadcast one-way thing. And I think it's about time to engage and to think also that the policymakers, they can say, and we should learn something from them. So maybe it's about time to start a dialogue.
So it's the dialogue that is your main point?
Yeah,
An active dialogue.
A kind of insightful conversation, which is beyond scientists and policymakers, maybe with stakeholders.
I can see a lot of response here. So yes.
So and
Jeff and Noah
just
and Peter.
a final comment. And actually, while he was putting that, I was thinking that in this in the next room where we have these groups, we don't have anything about. We have things about renewable. We have things about tools. But maybe this would deserve a group.
I'm not sure if I understood you properly, but when Lord Puttnam was talking about embarrassment, what I think he meant was that embarrassment is a great tool against politicians. He wasn't.
I know.
They're very hardy, though. Especially when their money comes into it.
Yeah. And then Peter,
On that note, I think it's quite interesting that Jim Henson, one of the head NASA scientists associated with climate change, has recently started advocating for direct civil disobedience in terms of engaging governmental figures in that regard. I think one of the other issues here, though, has to do with the role of scientists as some type of impartial judge, and this relates somewhat to the world of advocacy and aid, where in which the Red Cross, Red Crescent, for example, has a philosophy of always having to be impartial so that you can therefore be allowed into the country where emergencies are occurring, right? So not having a political advocacy edge. And there is, to some degree, some elements of impartiality associated with science. And the question then becomes, at what point do we as citizens, who also happen to be professional scientists, start to go along the Jim Henson line of things and start to say, no, there is some more radical action required? And then how does that then compromise our actual professional judgment, our professional impartiality? So it's quite a thorny subject.
Absolutely. I think Peter next, then Stephen, then back to Patrick here.
It's very complex.
Yes.
I wanted to sort of open it up even further, really. Throughout history, and presumably before history, civilizations and so on have risen and fallen. The fundamentally pragmatism, if you like, seems to lead people sometimes up to wonderful things, which then crash. Often ecological. I mean, we don't know always why, but essentially that's what happens. And we're actually at an incredible, fantastic hinge point in history, because for the first time, an abstract cognitive thing called a climate model is being used to look sort of into the future, and with all the, doubts and issues and so on about that, but it is, and it's telling us, gosh, do you realise that if you go on doing this, you look as though you're going to fall over a cliff? Well, this is an absolutely remarkable moment, and it is remarkable that actually things are actually happening. I mean, that we've even got this far is already remarkable. And so I don't rule out the possibility of tipping points, and I think there is a complete change in public perception of these issues as well. And so although, we've had short-term financial issue due to idiotic, selfish, greedy, anyway, that's all true, but it has been a shock to the system, because it's been very important to disturb this belief, this religion on market systems being wonderful and let them rip and so on. Very important to disturb that, and for us to go back and think, maybe there isn't a simple answer. There's no simple answer. Central planning doesn't seem to work. Wild capitalism doesn't work. The world is more complex than that. And it's got these multiple layers, and it's got structures and so on. So all I really want to signal is that I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic, and that this is truly a remarkable historical moment, in that we are here talking about this. This is a subject. There is funding, there is backing. People are interested in it. They realise and I think that's an absolutely extraordinary situation for humanity.
Absolutely. I'm also very optimistic, because I think at the critical point is when we also become very creative. I mean, if we think of Prigozhin and dissipative structures and so on, it's at that critical point that the new order is created. Yeah. And I think we are now being pushed to that stage. Stephen?
I think it's a great shame if the politicians say the only way we will influence them is if we embarrass them. I think we have to really educate them much better, and I'm hoping that we are doing that. I'm hoping the younger politicians have more nous about them, that they actually are aware of the error bars that scientists put on things, and they are aware that not all scientists will agree, and that's the whole point of how we do science, is to debate and discuss. And I think politicians generally are really open to that sort of thing, so I'm not as pessimistic as Lord Puttnam is at doing that. I think the issue about war is quite true, because you often win wars, but with climate change I think it's going to go on. So it's not something that's just going to do something and it's all over and done with. If you speak with John Beddington, who's the current advisor to government, his main thing at the moment is in fact the population increase and the shortage of water is going to hit us in 20 years, whereas the real effects of climate change is more like 50 to 100 years. So there are lots of little things that we can do along the way, and I think it's, in the ideas of complexity, it's often the little things that we do may eventually build up to be something very effective.
Yeah. Yes. And that is where I think we need the engagement of the individual citizen and communities from the micro level right up. Exactly.
I'm building really on the...
Okay, but say who you are, please.
Sorry,
yes.
I'm Jean Bolton. I'm a visiting fellow at Cranfield with Peter. Peter and I ran an elective on complexity with MBA students at Cranfield for several years until they decided to drop it because it was too complex. And we asked people, and we've got sort of years of this information to look at tipping points, both in markets, in companies, but also historically, and what created the antecedents to tipping. And what was clear from generally speaking, when you analysed all those, it was almost always ordinary people's behaviours and changes in decision making. So it was the consumer and it was the public that actually in the end pulled the change. And things like and the other thing to kind of connect with what you said is that. Quite often, when we are reaching a point of instability, moving, towards the edge of an attractor basin, however you want to see it, a lot's happening under the surface, and there's nothing obviously to show for it, but it's happening, and that those tips can often happen quite suddenly and spectacularly. And the fall of the Berlin Wall was like that. The end of apartheid was like that, I think. But it wasn't that we place a lot of attention in tipping points on the moment of tipping, but actually it's what's gone on before. It's the reconstituting of the components and the ideas and the beliefs and the behaviours. And it does feel that that's what we're getting close to, that there's a huge amount. I saw the Age of Stupid film as well, and there's a huge amount of public concern now about this, that who knows what's going to happen. So it makes me feel optimistic.
Absolutely. Can you pass that to Patrick? And while you're doing that, I think I'd like to link your 2 points together, because I think they are very closely linked. Because, as you say, the tipping point doesn't just happen. It is all the micro interactions and changes that are happening all the time. And because they are perhaps at a level that we cannot yet observe them, we may not be aware of them, but they are happening nevertheless. So that micro level is absolutely essential, so that we need to be constantly doing things at even at the smallest level. So Patrick, yeah.
Thank you. It's always nice to be. You put up your hand and then for other people speak, and then you try to combine it. So I think sort of continue what you said with the normal people making the tipping points happening. Because yesterday I was surfing on a blogging page in Sweden, and I noticed that there's a new topic every day, and even MPs are taking part in this debate. And you know that it's only today that this is relevant. So normal people actually write comments and say, "Oh, how stupid is this," etc. So there's like a direct daily sort of feedback there, and so that sort of makes me think how maybe we as academics. I mean, there's a big shift with the internet enabling this grassroots communication and the change of new media. So when David Puttnam said that it's not the solution to the future, it's not the tools for the past, but at the same time, I've had a feeling that when he was talking to the communication with politicians, he was not taking this new shift of new media into account. So that's maybe the question to the crowd, how we can utilize this to change.
Okay, I've got quite a lot before you, actually. It's the gentleman at the back there, then 1, 2, 3, and then 4, yeah?
Yeah, Chris Tennant at the LSE. Picking up on Stephen's point, I mean, it wasn't so much talking about embarrassing politicians, it was his desire that the scientists should talk with a united voice. Seems to me as absolutely missing fundamentally the point, and it's very frightening that he actually said that, I thought, because they won't get that, and that's the point of the problem.
Exactly.
The second thing, I think, is the emergence of this rhetoric of gloom and doom. And so it's almost you're justifying yourself as somebody who's taking it seriously by sounding pessimistic while continuing to advocate more of the same policies. And I think it's becoming very pervasive, this pessimistic rhetoric, while actually doing less and less.
Okay, can you pass it forward now, please, because it's 1, 2, yes.
Jane Corbett from the Open University. And I'd like to take a little bit of a leap and throw in a suggestion for something we might do today, for a little bit of creativity and fun in the background. And it's coming back to this theme of moral courage, which David Puttnam raised, but other speakers have very eloquently too. And we'd all rather live in a world where anybody in a leadership position is using moral courage and working with it well, but it's hard to do. And I think what we as academics are very good at doing is understanding the very complex systems that we're part of, diagnosing the problems, and then at a very generic level, outlining what the solutions need to be. So I just wanted to suggest an exercise where we might have a kind of hands-on, taking a bit of a leap with it, which is that we do put up a piece of paper and over the coffee break put it up on the wall, and everybody just creatively brainstorms one suggestion for what a low-carbon future might look like, and just get it up there. It'll be messy, it'll be incomplete, it'll be complex and ill-determined, but at least it'll be us practicing that skill of future thinking, which we know we're all going to need to do. And we don't have to disclose the results, but at least we're rehearsing that skill, and who knows where we'll be using it in other venues.
Great, excellent, thank you.
Thanks, I think that's a great idea. I want to come back to this point about the sort of science-policy interaction. I think it was pretty devastating critique of the political process. I don't know if it was intended, but that was what came across from David Puttnam. And about this point about engaging with social movements. I mean, I think change, I mean, again, slightly simplistically, but I think change it needs the social activism, which is out there, which, as people say, is bubbling under, and it needs the new ideas and new thinking, which comes partly from the academic, but also other communities. But a lot of us, spend a lot of time engaging with policymakers and with business, and maybe we need to engage more with the social movements and the community groups and find ways of doing that, because that's where the change is coming from, and I don't think we've necessarily been very good at engaging with those communities. So.
Linda Korscher, LSE. I'm very supportive of the vision stuff that was talked about here and with Puttnam. But really, when you identify a vision, you also have to come to terms with what the challenges to the vision are. And there's optimism about the economic changes, but in actual fact, we're still stuck with the huge elephant in the room of the rational economic model is not abandoned at this stage. And in fact, it's being entrenched into trade agreements in an ongoing way. There was reference this morning to international law, that it moves slowly, etc., but international trade law is actually marching ahead and entrenches the rational economic model, entrenches the market domination, entrenches deregulation, and reduces the right to regulate and hands the power to transnational capital. reducing that right to regulate. So this is a challenge that's ongoing at the same time, but is not seen or discussed very much, but has to be taken into account. A couple of other points I want to make. One is the references to population. There have been this morning and just now. It's pretty established that the main factor that discourages a soaring population is educating girls and women's rights, strengthening women's rights. But I don't hear or see that in the discussion on climate change, where it's such a big factor. It should be, logically, right through all of policy, that support for women's rights. For instance, in aid policy. But it conveniently seems to be lacking. Another thing I want to draw attention to is that it's kind of related both to rational economics and to population, perhaps, is that you could believe, if you landed here from another planet, you could believe that the population consisted of older middle-aged men overpaid in suits, because that's all we ever see in front of us is later middle-aged men in suits who are overpaid. But that's not what the population is. Now, if change comes from, as was suggested over here, comes from normal people, that they don't all look like that. So somehow we need some shift in that, who we see in front of us, who's making the decisions, where the power lies, because there's also a connection between the people I've described and rational economics, holding that rational economic model, power, inequality. That's the points I want to make. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. I saw a lot of nods in the audience.
Thank you. I'm Anna Plodowski. I'm a member of Peckham Power Company, which is a community-led community energy infrastructure project. But for my paid employment, I'm a brain imager at the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College London. And so I have a real interest in the behavioural sciences and why findings from the behavioural sciences are not being taken on board in this issue. I think one of the things I'd like to say is that I was very frustrated at Lord Puttnam saying, we mustn't do things like retrofit houses because that will lull people into a false sense of security and then we won't engage with this issue. My understanding is that it is behaviour that leads attitudes, not the other way round. And therefore what we need is radical infrastructure change, because when people see that happening on the ground, then they will understand, oh yes, this is happening and I can do it. And I think that's a really powerful message that we need to get out there. And I think there's a whole range of evidence from neuroscience, psychology, as well as probably from complexity science that will say that. And we really need to use that to push policy. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And the second thing is that, while I think the internet can be fantastic, and I certainly got into climate activism via the internet, I think we really do need to do that practical, real-world stuff. It's got past the stage of information. We need to be doing stuff. I suppose that's what I'd like to say. And
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Can you pass it to Peter, please?
Okay.
I think,
yes,
and then Patrick. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to come back because I'd written down this morning that I was going to say population, and now it's already been said, so I won't say it. But I do want 20 years ago or something, that was a hot topic. So people talked about population as the issue and so on and so forth. The fact is that footprints, running out of water, these are all just symptoms of the same problem, which is that if you solve a problem the population will just go on until it hits the next problem, and so it will go on until the system crashes and you have mega deaths. I mean, that is what will happen. It's happened to every civilization previously. So I think it's terribly important to raise that issue. We do know about, the transition processes in development where, as you said, absolutely, women's rights and so on. And so and affluence and women's rights actually are the two things. Obviously, part of the problem, that's why nobody does talk about population properly, other than Crispin Tickell, who I heard making a serious statement about it, is that religions, dominant religions in the world, don't want to talk about it. In fact, they want more population. So you have, and you can look at India, you can look at, Islam, and you can look at Catholicism and neo-something American people, nutcases. Anyway, the point is that they want more population, and so this is why it's, people don't talk about it because it's a big problem and so on. But I think that we won't be able to avoid talking about that at some point. At some point we'll have to talk about it. You cannot if you can solve the problems for that many people, then it goes up to there, and then you can't solve them, and so it will go on. So I think that is something that we really have to face up to, and I just to come back also on your thing about behaviour, which I agree completely. I think it's absolutely no point abandoning things we can do. Actually, we need to do everything we can do, everything, because if we can bring down demand, I'm talking about solving the current problem at current population levels, but then at the same time as using new technology and all the great things that we heard about this morning, then it will be the combination of all those things that will be required, and even as we say, may not be enough at this point. But still, we have to do everything.
Absolutely.
So, yep, okay.
So Patrick and then Yasmin, and I think that's it for this session.
Patrick Buterman of Archie Partnership again. I was at Complex 07 in Australia a couple of years ago, and there was a wonderful lunchtime discussion on this topic. And there was definitely a group of people who were basically about to slit their wrists because they were so depressed about it, and another group of people who were really very optimistic. And part of the reason they were optimistic is because they felt that the internet gave humanity a way of being self-aware collectively in a way that hasn't existed before. We've always had to go through politicians and, dare I say, even religious figures to give our sense of identity. It's been said that politicians and organisations think on the level of an 8-year-old. Now, the last thing I do is to give the 8-year-old some of the science that we can give, because when you give an 8-year-old that kind of power, they tend to misuse it. And if you've read Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, you can understand what that does when people think that if you can't work out how to make a society work, if you break it completely, you can then build it as you want. That's clearly not what we want to do. So the point that I'm making is, I think we need to realise that the change isn't going to come from the politicians, and we should stop waiting for that, and that it is going to come from the people. And therefore, we should be much more engaged with the people in the way that Anna is, because that's where the change is going to come from.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody has heard about transition towns. I think that's another way of doing it. Yasmin, could you pass it back to Yasmin, please?
Well, I thought it's time for a change, so I'm going to do a bit of a ramble rather than the coherent thinking we've had so far. So there are three things that bother me. One speaking up on the thing about depending on markets and so on. And we haven't talked much about carbon credits, but to me that seems a scary thing, partly because, well, we haven't got the market working right now, but if the market does work, is that going to be the new divide between the haves and the have-nots, and what does it do to the poorer countries? So that's one of my rambles. The other is this notion of vision, because people talk quite grandly about vision and how we must have a vision, give a vision, take a vision, lead with a vision, use the media for a vision. And I think it has its place. But I think it's a bit dangerous to think we're giving people visions, because for things to happen, it comes back to the grounded behaviour stuff. People have to make their own visions. But that's got quite a nice complexity kind of touch to it, because I think one of the kind of problems when we think about complex systems, or when I think about complex systems, what really bugs me up is, what is the right level of abstraction? Right? It's a level of abstraction that matters. Now, if we're talking visioning, then what matters is get it right, so you have it abstract enough for it to be universal enough, and have enough space for people to play and be creative in. And that has to be done at a local level, because, coming back to what you were saying about all movements are led by consumers or citizens or whatever. Why? Well, because context matters. It's all contextual. And very often what we're getting from surveys and policy-making type of data is some kind of attribution of causality. So you do this and you might get this kind of output. You did this intervention and it might help in this kind of way. And I think that is done retrospectively, but you don't get this kind of tipping point or change because things are happening under the surface and everybody's thinking about energy or carbon footprints. What happens is within that context, it makes sense to do things in certain ways, and then you get a convergence where common sense and pragmatics gets it to a point where it becomes a collective thing. And it's not that thought through, it's not that intentional. So I think we can't get away from context. And I think I'm sort of with the notion that Eve was trying to put forward with the panel stuff, because it matters. What you do on the ground actually matters. And I don't think we can get away from the local.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's my ramble.
We need to finish, actually. Is it very, very brief?
It's very brief and very related to that.
Okay, very brief.
I wanted to comment on the embarrassment thing. I think we might have partly missed the point. We keep talking about politicians, but politicians can only act in symbiosis with the bureaucracies. And I'm feeling that the embarrassment thing is, if we look at think what was just being said there and what's been said by other people, that doing things locally is the way to embarrass the politicians. Not embarrass them in a shame way, but embarrass them into action. I mean, like prod them. And by doing things locally in neighbourhoods, we get at the local elected politicians who get at the national elected politicians who will then be embarrassed into doing something because they've got so many people clamouring in their context, their local context, that they actually have to do something because they can't bear it anymore. And that gives them the power then to face down the bureaucracies that are actually saying why they can't do it. Sometimes it doesn't lead to very good decisions. But I think that we've got to think about that process, and that's why the local is so important, because our democracy actually does work if we can have some intelligence about it.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you, everyone. I think a big hand for everyone.